Some of the Chicago Bears' biggest free agent signings from this offseason got off to a rough start this year. But since then, a few of them have turned it around, so it's a good time to check back in and reevaluate how we feel Ryan Poles did spending his salary cap space this year.
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lauren Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. You can follow me on Twitter at CoxSports1. You can follow the podcast at Locked On Bears on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and the Locked On Bears YouTube channel, where you can keep up with all of our video podcasts as well. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. On the show today, we check in at the bye week on how Ryan Poles' free agent signings are performing so far. Because early on, guys like DeAndre Swift and others were struggling, not playing well and looking like bad signings for Ryan Poles. But since then, he and others have started to turn things around a little bit more, and maybe we can have a little more faith in the general manager's ability to spend cap space on outside free agents. So we'll check in at this point in the season to try and figure out how well DeAndre Swift is doing, Kevin Byard, Gerald Everett, a couple of guys on the offensive line, and one free agent signing we still haven't seen yet, but could be returning and making more of an impact here in the immediate future. But I think what brought this on for me the most, though, was the story of DeAndre Swift, how poorly he started this season and how well he's been able to turn it around in the last few weeks. I think we've done a decent enough job here on the podcast of trying to check in on this Bears running game throughout the improvement on their offense as a whole. And we've talked about some of the things that Shane Waldron has done differently over the last few weeks compared to the things they were trying to do in the running game in the first couple of weeks, largely from a play calling standpoint and a run scheme standpoint, switching up the calls of how they're running the ball with DeAndre Swift. But I think we might not all fully realize just how well DeAndre Swift is playing. We knew he was really bad to start the season, and we know he's been better since then, but it turns out he's been a lot better, like one of the best running backs in football the last couple of weeks, better, at least in terms of production. ESPN's Field Yates tweeted out some kind of shocking numbers for me for DeAndre Swift, that over the last 3 weeks, DeAndre Swift ranks 4th in rushing yards in the NFL among running backs, 3rd in rushing touchdowns, 1st in receiving yards among running backs, and 2nd in scrimmage yards among running backs. And from a fantasy football perspective, he ranks 2nd in fantasy points among all running backs over the last 3 weeks of the season. That's top 5 in all of those categories, top 3 in most of those categories, and top 2 in a few of those categories as well. That is and of course, these are specific stats, and they're not perfect measurements of who the best running back is, but ranking in the top 5 in production in a lot of the major ways you see at the running back position. And that's super, super encouraging over the last 3 weeks. You can make the argument that we've heard about Caleb Williams too. It's he's doing it against bad defenses, but he wasn't doing it against a bad Indianapolis Colts run defense, right? Just because the run defense ranks poorly doesn't necessarily mean that DeAndre Swift is going to be guaranteed some big game, because the Colts had the worst run defense in football when the Bears played them in week 3. And as a team, the Bears only rushed for 63 yards. And in that game, DeAndre Swift only rushed for 20 yards on 13 carries. So, well, yes, I'm sure some of it has been lower quality of defenses. Some of it has been better blocking from the offensive line that has made a lineup change and seems to have settled into what that group is going to look like, at least for now, up front there, and building some continuity. But also, like we've discussed on the podcast, going to a lot more gap scheme runs, a lot more duo downhill north-south running to push at the point of attack vertically, and then balancing that out with some of the stretch outside zone runs where they try and get into the sideline before you cut upfield, so that you're attacking the defense horizontally and you're attacking them vertically in the running game, and not allowing them to get too used to what you want to do. If you're just running the zone all the time, they can kind of overplay. When they see you go to a running play, they're going to just sprint to get outside and funnel you back inside. Well, if you do that, then they're going to pound it up the middle on more of those gap scheme runs. And if you start getting too aggressive up the middle, well, then they're going to take it to the outside and beat you to the edge with some of those outside zone runs. And it's formed a nice balance, and also I think a little bit of an offensive running game identity with Swift that has helped open things up in the running game. And it's worth noticing the difference of what having a really good running game has been able to do to help Caleb Williams and take a lot of the pressure off of him. In that, of course, when your offense is running the ball better, things are going to be easier. But the Bears have been able to, with a better running game, get out of those long down and distance situations and really stay ahead of the sticks. Too often early in the year when DeAndre Swift was struggling, they'd hand it off on 1st and 10 and gain a yard or two, and you'd get 2nd and 9 or 2nd and 8. And then if you have an incomplete pass on 2nd and 9 or 2nd and 8, then you have 3rd and long. Or even if you run it again and you get 1 or 2 yards, you have 3rd and 8 or 3rd and 7 in that process, and it's still 3rd and longer than you want your rookie quarterback to have to be in. I also think one of the other underrated aspects here is that receiving yards stat. To be leading running backs in receiving yards over the last 3 weeks is critical. The way the Bears have gotten him involved in the passing game so that Caleb Williams doesn't have to feel like, if I'm not throwing to Komet or Moore or Dunze or Keenan Allen, then I don't really have an option. I got to find one of those guys because those are my playmakers. To be able to check it down to DeAndre Swift and get 6 or 7 or 8 or 9 yards after the catch on plays like that is another one of those difference between staying ahead of the sticks and getting behind the sticks. If it's 1st and 10, you check it down to Swift and he gains a yard, you're still at 2nd and 9. It's not really moving you forward. But if you check it down to Swift and he gets you 6 yards and makes plays after the catch, that's such a weapon for this Bears offense, and it adds that much more of a threat in the screen game here. The question I have long-term here still is how well he keeps it up, but then also just financially, right? Part of the reason there was a lot of disappointment in Swift's struggles is how much they're paying him. His cap hit this season's only $5.8 million comparatively, but next year it jumps up to $9.3 million. And he's got the vast majority of that is guaranteed next season. So you're locked into DeAndre Swift this year and next year, pretty much no matter what happens. You could cut him and save about $500,000 next year if you want to, but you'd still be paying him over $8 million to not play for you if he were to keep struggling. So you need to be getting the most out of DeAndre Swift, and that has needed to be a high priority for the Chicago Bears, given what they've been able to invest in him. It's worth noting that Swift is a guy who doesn't rank particularly high in yards after contact, and even missed tackles. I think he's kind of near average in terms of generating missed tackles, but it feels like his game is more about the speed and explosiveness as opposed to bouncing off of defenders per se. He'll make you miss, but not make you miss from running over you, but he's gonna get through the hole before the linebacker can get there. So it doesn't really count as a missed tackle because the linebacker never got the opportunity to make the tackle attempt because Swift hit it quicker than the defender was able to get there and be involved in the play. So cautiously optimistic that Swift has figured things out. I don't know that he's going to turn into one of the top 5 running backs in the NFL over the course of the full season by any means, but the Bears are getting at least something close to good enough from DeAndre Swift given the contract that they gave him, and that's a long way from where we were in the first 3 weeks of the season where he looked like the biggest free agent bust on the roster. I think that title now belongs to Gerald Everett, who we'll talk about here in a little bit. But I think we should also make sure we're appreciating the fountain of youth that Kevin Byard has found at safety for the Chicago Bears, some of which I think you can attribute to the Bears defense just being so good around him, but also the Bears defense using Kevin Byard a little differently than he had been used in the past with other teams that maybe have helped him stay a little bit more fresh and a little bit more available for the Bears in terms of just being 100% the best version of Kevin Byard he can be at this stage of his career. So we'll check in on the success he's having in this Bears defense next on Locked On Bears. The Locked On Bears podcast is brought to you by our friends at Arena Club. For most of us that like collecting cards, the idea of spending $2,000 or more on a Patrick Mahomes rookie card or a Caleb Williams rookie card, it just isn't in the cards. I mean, we all love collecting, but that's some serious money to drop. But thanks to our friends at arena.com and their slab packs, Now it's possible to score gem cards in mint condition for a fraction of their retail price. Arena Club is the only repack that provides real value with a complete view of all possible cards and clear hit rates for each one. These slab packs from Arena Club are revolutionizing the repack game with their transparency. So whether you're buying, selling, trading, or displaying, Arena Club is the card collecting platform you have to check out. Right now, you can get 10% off your first slab pack or card purchase by going to arenaclub.com/lockedonnfl and using our promo code LOCKEDONNFL. That's arenaclub.com/lockedonnfl, code LOCKEDONNFL for 10% off your first purchase. Locked On Bears is also brought to you by our friends at Gametime, the best way to get tickets for all of your favorite live events. Whether you want to get tickets to see the Bears or a baseball playoff game or the basketball season and hockey season getting rolling here, or not even just sports, comedy shows, theater shows, concerts. I use the Gametime app on my phone all the time. I actually just got tickets to go see the comedian Louis Black. I'm actually giving them to my mom for her birthday coming up here, and also seeing comedian Mike Birbiglia coming up. And I got my tickets on Gametime because with Gametime, I can see the view from the seats that I'm purchasing right in the app before I buy the tickets. And you can turn on all-in pricing so that there aren't any added fees at the end of the checkout process that make your tickets cost way more than you thought they would. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use our promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem our code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? Game time. DeAndre Swift has figured some things out for the Chicago Bears and is salvaging what looked like a rocky free agent signing. But I think the player who's been the most consistent as far as the guys Ryan Poles signed this offseason and brought in has been Kevin Byard at the safety spot. We wondered, after he had a down year with first the Tennessee Titans, but then got traded to the Philadelphia Eagles and didn't play as well for them last season, you started to wonder a little bit, is this guy on the way down in his career? You know, he just turned 31 in August, so are the Bears getting a washed up, past his prime Kevin Byard that just isn't the Pro Bowl player he once was earlier in his career? And I'm not ready to say, does he belong in the Pro Bowl or not this year? I mean, it's only been 6 games, and I don't know if I haven't been able to evaluate every safety in the NFL to say, okay, yeah, he definitely is. But like, he's a top 5 graded safety on Pro Football Focus. Like, I think he's playing up to a Pro Bowl level at this point in the process, and it's been such a great addition to this Bears secondary that Ryan Poles does deserve a lot of credit for. I was skeptical less about Byard's age and overall ability, because I kind of felt like, yeah, okay, he was in a bad situation with the Eagles, and the last time we saw him on a decent Titans defense, he was still pretty good. So I had some confidence that Byard would still turn out to be a pretty good player. But what I was skeptical about when Ryan Poles signed him was his fit in this Chicago Bears defense specifically, his fit next to Jaquan Brisker. Because we talked about during the offseason, Byard has spent most of his career, his entire career really, as much more of a strong safety, a guy who plays up in the box, can come down in the slot a little bit, and is not as much the deep safety on the back end. And so when you pair Kevin Byard with a box safety skill set with Jaquan Brisker, who's also been a full-time strong safety, box safety, 2 guys that seem to be better near the line of scrimmage and aren't as effective as the deep free safety on the back end, I wondered a little bit how well that would work, because you'd have to take one of the box safeties and play them less in the box than they're used to in their career, and how well they might be able to handle that transition. And so far, it's been Kevin Byard who's been more of the free safety, and he's been able to handle it really, really well. Like, just to sort of illustrate this for you, when you look over the course of Kevin Byard's career, and this dates back pretty much his entire career here, but we'll just go through the last handful of years because it's representative of earlier years as well. But like before he came to Chicago, the last 4 years for Kevin Byard, he was lining up at strong safety about 55 to 60% of the time in any given year, and playing free safety, 40 to 45 to 50% of the time. So, not drastically split as an overly strong safety, but someone who they preferred to keep in more of a strong safety role. and it was not in the Eddie Jackson playing the true deep free safety the majority of the time type of spot. In Chicago, he's down to just 32% strong safety. You can basically say 2/3 he's a strong safety. Excuse me. Well, 1/3 he's a strong safety, and 2/3 he's a free safety now. When before it was closer to 60-40 strong safety, or even 55-45 strong safety. Now it's the other way. It's 2/3 free safety, 1/3 strong safety. The majority of his time, he is lining up back deep on plays. Now that's where he's aligned at the snap. So of course, you could rotate down into coverages. So he's not playing true deep coverages 68% of the time here, but he is lining up pre-snap at that free safety position 68% of the time here. And whether it's that or just playing in a very good Chicago Bears secondary, he's having a really strong season even by his own standards here. So far, he's averaging a career low in missed tackles percentage. Like, he's tackling at the best rate of his career so far. He's also currently allowing the lowest yards per catch of his career allowed. So far through 6 games, he has allowed only one catch of over 10 yards. Every other catch has been under 10 yards allowed on the catches he has given up. And the passer rating he's given up is a 6-year low for Kevin Byard in coverage. He has been better, you compare it to his early Pro Bowl seasons, like 2017 or whatever. When he had 8 interceptions that year, he's not that elite. He's not 24-year-old Kevin Byard anymore, but he is having a really good season by his own individual standards there. He has 2 pass breakups already this season, 1 interception. He had 1 pass breakup all of last year. And 2 years ago in Tennessee, he only had 2 pass breakups. So he's getting his hands on more passes as well. He's doing everything better. And I think some of that is from getting a better vantage point as a deep safety there. You're not going to be targeted as much. The ball is going to be in the air for a longer time. And he's also been able to step into just more of that natural leadership role on the back end. Some of that is that the cornerback coverage has been so good that Kevin Byard hasn't been tested a ton in some of those areas either, and that the pass rush has been good enough that the Bears haven't been in position to give up a lot of big downfield plays or come into Kevin Byard's territory a bunch down there. Some of this is definitely situational, but some of it too is hey, when he's not, punching around in the box and taking a lot of hits and taking on as many blocks all the time, he's got a little bit more energy, right? He's not as beat up and battered. He doesn't miss games in his career, but the legs can get a little heavy when you keep meeting offensive linemen in the hole when you're up in the box all the time and having to deliver hits and cover over the middle of the field. He just doesn't have to take as many bumps, and the physicality doesn't have to be as stressful and strenuous on his body when he's playing back on the deep end a little bit more. So I think it's all worked out very nicely for Kevin Byard and for the Chicago Bears defense and for Jaquan Brisker, allowing Brisker to still play more in the box, in a little bit more of that role. But Brisker's played deep a lot too. They've been doing a good job of showing a lot of 2 deep looks and rotating them down and trying to mix things up so it's not so predictable. Last year was pretty predictable. Eddie Jackson's going to be the deep guy, and Jaquan Brisker's going to be the underneath guy. They're making it a little bit more interchangeable with Byard than it has been with Eddie Jackson, and I think as a whole then, the defense benefits from that. The defense has been less predictable, and we've seen Matt Eberflus over the course of this season be able to mix up coverages even more from week to week than what we saw even just last year with Jackson and Brisker. That any given game plan, you might see them run a lot more cover 4 this week than they have in previous weeks. Or some weeks they'll go a lot more, cover 3 and cover 1 and go single deep safety a lot more. And some weeks they'll go 2 deep safeties a lot more. They've had a lot more variety on the back end to not get too predictable and to not fall into tendencies that veteran quarterbacks on the other side are able to take advantage of. I still wonder whether Kevin Byard will be back next season just because of his age and his price. So this year he's costing $6.5 million. He's playing great. That's worth it for sure. Next year he'll turn 32 and his cap hit goes up to $8.5 million. And not very much of that is guaranteed. So you could cut him after this season and save $7 million in cap space, but then you need a new starting safety. So I have a feeling the Bears will bring him back so long as he keeps playing up to this level. And say $8.5 million for this level of play is good, but you just wonder, eventually it does have to drop off a little bit, and this fountain of youth can't last forever, but I think as long as he keeps playing well, Kevin Byard will keep being a welcomed addition to the back end of this Bears secondary, but they really should draft and develop the long-term replacement there, unless they think it's Elijah Hicks, but I don't know that I've seen Elijah Hicks play so good that I'm confident to say, yeah, cut Kevin Byard after this year and roll with Hicks and Brisker on the back end. I'd like to have a more I don't know, a clearer heir apparent there as opposed to a career special teams guy behind him there. So Byard and Swift have proven to be good to great free agent signings for Ryan Poles. They're not the only good ones, but there's also been at least a couple of iffy ones as well. So we'll talk about how Gerald Everett keeps playing less and less and less in the Chicago Bears offense, and also a hit and a miss on the offensive line as well, and also a free agent signing that's still to be determined, because we haven't, just an incomplete grade because we haven't seen him yet, but we are going to see him here very soon. That's next on Locked On Bears. The Locked On Bears podcast is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel Sportsbook, America's #1 sportsbook. And FanDuel is here to help you start the season with a big return, because they're going to give you $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. So you bet $5 on anything. You can bet on Caleb Williams' Rookie of the Year odds. You can bet on the Bears to win the NFC North, but not just football games, basketball, soccer, boxing, tennis, hockey, you name it, they've got it all on FanDuel, all in their app that's safe, secure, and super easy to use. A $5 bet on any of those sports, whether your bet is correct or not, doesn't matter. They're going to throw an extra $200 in bonus bets guaranteed right into your account to keep the fun rolling all season long. So to get your $200 in guaranteed bonus bets after your first $5 bet, visit FanDuel.com and download America's #1 sportsbook. There's no salvaging or putting lipstick on the disappointment that Gerald Everett has been this season at tight end. And I was someone who was very optimistic about the signing of Gerald Everett and still think the Bears can get more out of Gerald Everett than what they've gotten out of him so far. Part of it's just not having a lot of space for him in the offense when you do have the kind of good receivers that the Bears do. There's only so many targets to go around, and we talked this offseason about how, like, somebody's production is going to have to come down, and it's been Gerald Everett's. And to be fair, I was excited about Gerald Everett as a signing before they traded for Keenan Allen, and before they drafted Rome Odunze. So when it was just DJ Moore, Cole Kmet, and Gerald Everett, I thought, man, great. Everett can be a really big part of this passing game. Then you add in 2 more great wide receivers, and all of a sudden, Gerald Everett moves down to 5th or 6th on the passing pecking order there between Moore, Keenan Allen, Cole Kmet, Rome Odunze, DeAndre Swift, Gerald Everett. Like, he's at least 6th on the order of, like, if you got to have your best weapons on the field, I don't know if he's one of your top 5 best weapons on this offense anymore, and that's not necessarily his fault, although, to be fair, like, he also has not played particularly well. We knew coming in he wasn't going to be that great of a blocker. He's never been a great blocker. You didn't sign Gerald Everett to be a blocking tight end in your offense. He's done some of it. It's been okay at times, but you signed Gerald Everett because of his ability as a receiver, because he's a guy who's been a 400 to 600 yard receiver pretty much every season of his career, at least the last handful of seasons with the Chargers and with the Seahawks and Shane Waldron. So he has experience in this offense as well. Like, it was supposed to be a nice complementary receiving weapon. And there was even, I would say, unfounded tight end controversy of, like, is Gerald Everett supplanting Cole Kmet as the Bears starting tight end? You know, based on preseason playing time and what we saw in week 1, it looked like Gerald Everett was the new #1 tight end in Chicago, which was never the case, because they were using him and have continued to use him more like a big slot receiver than an actual tight end in terms of his alignment on the field. He was just playing more at receiver, whereas Kmet was always still the #1 tight end here. But nonetheless, like, he has significantly dropped off since that point in terms of what he's done in the offense and just how the offense is using him. I mean, you look at this season so far, Gerald Everett's snap counts continue to decline, and his box score stats have been pretty abysmal at this point. You know, week 1, when all the, is he a starter controversy was, he played 61% of the snaps on offense against the Tennessee Titans. And that was kind of a big surprise. It was like, whoa, they're using Gerald Everett a lot here. He's going to be a big part of this offense. And immediately they changed that. And since then, it's been steadily going down. 61% in week 1, dropped to 36% in week 2, then 33%, 33%, 30%. And then in London against the Jaguars, he was on the field for just 20% of the Bears' offensive snaps. He has become much more of an afterthought. and perhaps in large part because of the receiving numbers and the blocking ability. That, in week 2, he had 2 catches for 22 yards. Those were his first 2 catches of the year. Since then, he's had 3 catches for 0 yards. This past week against the Jaguars, 1 catch for -1 yards. 2 weeks ago against Carolina, 2 catches for a total of 1 yard. He has 5 catches on the season for 22 yards, on the year. Like, that's just not good enough from Gerald Everett. The Bears signed him to a big contract. His cap hit is $5.5 million this year, and next year it's $6.5 million. Based on the cap hit, he is the 17th highest paid tight end in the NFL this season. Based on the total cash the Bears paid him this season, he is the 20th highest paid tight end in the NFL this season. Whether he is the 17th or the 20th highest paid tight end this season, however you want to measure highest paid tight end, he is producing nowhere near the 17th or 20th highest paid tight end. Again, 5 catches for 22 yards across 6 games is, one of the worst tight ends in terms of receiving production overall this season. And that's just not good enough for a player that had the potential to at least be a big part of this offense, and someone that the Bears paid a significant amount of money to, expecting him to be a significant enough contributor in this offense. Again, not the starting tight end, but someone who is supposed to be a 3, 4, 5, 600 yard season type guy is on pace for much, much less than that. He's averaging 3.7 yards per game. So my quick math would tell me that's under 100 yards he's on pace for to start this season, and it's not under 50, but it's not much. It's pretty close to 50 or 60 yards he's on pace for this season. Not equivalent to the 20th highest paid tight end in football. And so that's where, for now, Gerald Everett has been a free agent bust. I do think he's more talented than this. It's not that he's incapable of getting open and catching passes. I think he's maybe struggled with that a little bit more than we expected, but he's still a good tight end. He can still get open and can still catch passes. I think it's been more about the Bears saying, hey, our best playmakers are DJ Moore, Rome Odunze, Keenan Allen, Cole Kmet, and DeAndre Swift. Those 5 are going to be on the field the vast majority of the time. And so there just isn't a lot of playing time for Gerald Everett. And when he has gotten playing time, he hasn't taken very much of an advantage of it at this point. So you hope they can get some more out of Gerald Everett, but if he doesn't, at the end of this year, they can easily cut him and save $5.5 million on his salary next year and move on to a different backup tight end in the future. So not great there for Ryan Poles. That one's still a little blemish on the free agent class. But a couple of guys I want to mention here more briefly. I think we've all felt disappointed in Coleman Shelton as the Bears center, and I think he's felt underwhelming and underachieving, and you'd like to upgrade the center position. It's worth noting, Bears signed him on a 1-year deal worth, I think, $3 or $3.5 million. He's the 31st highest paid center in the NFL. I think he's 22nd in cap hit this season. And I feel like Coleman Shelton is playing like the 22nd or 23rd best center in football. I haven't watched every center in football, but if I told you I ranked all the centers and Coleman Shelton ranked 22nd, would you say that's too high? Maybe a little bit, but not much. Yeah, he's below average, but not the worst center in football. That's what he's being paid like, and that's what the Bears are getting out of him. It's disappointing, and you want better, but it's not like it was some big free agent bust. Whereas, like on the other end of the spectrum, Matt Pryor signed a 1-year, $1.75 million contract, basically veteran minimum, and he's starting at right guard and has been an upgrade over Nate Davis. I don't think he's been great either, but on a 1-year minimum contract, Matt Pryor's giving you below average to average starting caliber play. Like, that's objectively a good signing, really good value for a backup to come in and start and play at least decently well. Like, you can give Ryan Poles some credit there that the offensive line signings haven't been enough, but individually, okay, they're at least meeting expectations based on what the Bears gave up for them on the open market. And then I want to just, when we're talking about free agents here, I want to plant a little seed about Jake Martin. Coming off of injured reserve here soon, they activated his practice window. Defensive end, the Chicago Bears signed from the Indianapolis Colts. He's not going to come in and take over as a starter. He's not going to come in and have 10 sacks off the bench. But over the course of his career, he's averaged 3 or 4 sacks a year pretty consistently here. This was a guy who the Bears signed early in the offseason. He missed all of training camp and all of the preseason. And the Bears still chose to keep him throughout that process and are still trying to bring him back. I think they absolutely believe that Jacob Martin can be a valuable contributor to this defensive end rotation and to this Bears pass rush. Again, he's not going to be some breakout star, but don't be surprised if Jake Martin comes back and gets a sack or two and you're like, oh, who's this guy? Oh, the Bears signed him earlier this offseason. Oh, okay. Interesting. glad to see him start to make an impact. I think he'll be able to contribute in some ways here. I just hope he doesn't take too much playing time away from somebody like Austin Booker, who needs the playing time to develop and grow, but he's got to fit somewhere in that defensive line rotation. So we'll see what's still to come from Jacob Martin. Still plenty to come from the Locked On Bears podcast this week. Even though the Bears are on the bye week, we're not going anywhere. Thank you for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. Coming back tomorrow and make us your first listen once again, as we'll talk about Caleb Williams' path to winning Offensive Rookie of the Year and why he's still right there neck and neck with Jaden Daniels, and why I'm skeptical that Jaden Daniels will continue to keep up his level of efficiency and production for the full remainder of the next season, of the rest of the season, where Caleb can maybe surpass him in the Offensive Rookie of the Year rankings. I also want to just talk more generally about this rookie class in kind of the same way we did about the free agent class. That'll be coming for you next week as well. And I want to talk about how the Bears are stacking up with the rest of the NFC North and how this Bears defensive line in particular has done some overachieving so far this season. So lots more coming your way. Make sure you hit the subscribe button on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. That's going to be the best way to keep up with all of our daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. And it's going to be the best way to get your next opportunity to bear down.